Hello, and welcome to my Action Research virtual poster presentation. My name is Lindsay Jenkins, and I will be walking you through the research I have been planning throughout the course of these past 6 weeks. I will begin by introducing you to my research statement, problem, and guiding question. Let's get started. My problem statement. I feel it is my professional and ethical duty to ensure that students are looking at the world around them through a critical lens. In order for students to understand the things they are doing in the classroom and why they are doing these things, they must understand how to ask important and probing questions and have the ability to form personal opinions and self-reflect on those opinions. Critically thinking about the world that we live in is a life skill that provides students with the ability to ask important questions about the past, the present, and the future. Students are not bringing forth critical thinking skills in the academic work they are doing in class, and therefore likely not critically thinking outside of the classroom. Oftentimes, students do not look at what they are reading through a critical lens, and therefore do not know what critical questions to ask. Having the ability to step back and examine what it is you're doing and why you're doing it is just as important as actually doing the task. In order for students to understand why they are learning certain topics or information, they must think critically about how it contextually fits into their world outside of the classroom. The question that will be guiding my research is, how can I foster an environment that prioritizes critical thinking for my students and promotes student self-reflection on topics they are learning in order to gain a deeper and more meaningful understanding of the content? So before I get started in highlighting my action plan and data sources, I want to quickly go over some terms that are not only repeated throughout the entirety of my presentation, but that also play a crucial role in literature and overall discussions around my research topic. So critical thinking is the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. A critical lens is applying a specific framework or perspective to view or analyze something, for example, a novel. And self-reflection is the capacity of humans to exercise introspection and the willingness to learn about someone's character, actions, and motives. I will now be reviewing and discussing 3 articles that I found to be highly prevalent in my research and that will add a great deal of perspective to the concept of critical thinking. My first resource, titled Strategies for Teaching Students to Think Critically, a Meta-Analysis, describes critical thinking, or CT, as purposeful, self-regulatory judgment that results in interpretation, analysis, evaluation, and inference. Abrami, Bernard, and colleagues heavily contemplates and reviews whether critical thinking is a generic skill set or if it is dependable on a number of variables, including subject and context. The article references Woolfolk and the notion that critical thinking requires the conscious process of applying abstract knowledge that was learned in a specific context to a variety of other circumstances and situations. This line of reference and perspective is directly transferable and correlated to the classroom setting or educational institute, where the ultimate goal is to aid students in making across-the-board connections. This article highlights the overarching notion and belief that this ability to transfer knowledge, whether it be from math to language, history to geography, or social justice issues to their own communities, is the primary characteristic and goal of critical thinking. My second resource is titled Enhancing Students' Critical Thinking Skills Through Teaching and Learning by Inquiry-Based Learning Activities, Using Social Network and Cloud Computing. At the center of this article, research is inquiry-based learning and an overall explanation of the ways in which students' critical thinking skills can be enhanced through inquiry-based learning activities. As a way of narrowing the scope, as well as making it applicable to 21st century learning, the article specifically uses social networking to encourage student inquiry. By using a 21st century learning framework, Deposi and Wanaparun explore the skills that students will need to learn and acquire apart from core academic subject matter. These skills include critical thinking and problem solving, creativity and innovation, and communication and collaboration, all of which fall under the learning skills and work habits that we, as teachers, have a duty to assess and report on for all students. The study was conducted and critical thinking skills were taught using the 5E instructional model, which includes engagement, exploration, explanation, elaboration, and evaluation. As educators, we are familiar with the inquiry-based learning and components of the 5E model, and this research encourages using the online environment as a tool to ultimately foster and enhance critical thinking skills for all students. My third and final resource is called Critical and Creative Thinking as Learning Process at Top-Ranking Chinese Middle Schools, Possibilities and Required Improvements, and I have included this in my research to ensure a global perspective is being reviewed and taken into consideration. The article explores the stereotype that Chinese schools do not leave room for or promote critical thinking or creativity amongst their learners. Giving brief insight into the Chinese education system, the article highlights that Chinese classrooms are strongly teacher-guided, text-oriented, and all subjects are strictly organized by prescribed curricular objectives. The article heavily focuses on the notion that the ways in which a classroom is perceived by students is a primary determining factor for how much critical thinking and creativity will occur within that classroom. The participants of the study were all Chinese students from high-ranking middle schools who only accept those who attain the upper quarter in the entrance exams. They were all asked a variety of questions that required deeper-level critical thinking. The results indicated that above-average achievers in such examinations do apply critical and creative thinking as instruments for learning. I found it particularly important to include the information attained from this study in my own research, as it forces all educators to check our own biases and stereotypes. It reminds us to not assume a student's abilities based off preconceived notions and provides perspective on what 21st century learning looks like to different students and educators all over the world. In order to contextualize and understand all the information provided by the articles, here is a literature summary that directly correlates the literature to the research guiding question. At the root of 21st century learning is critical thinking skills. Having the knowledge and insight into how to implement the practice of critical thought processes into the classroom is crucial for the overall growth of students as well as educators. We have our own perspectives based off of personal experiences, and whether we look at 21st century learning as having skills such as collaboration, critical thinking, or problem solving, they all require a critical lens and deeper level of thinking. That is our job and responsibility to teach to students in order to help them thrive in today's world. The overwhelming amount of research on this topic is tangible proof that teaching is not just about delivering the curriculum, but rather about using educational space as a tool to prepare students with the knowledge and skills needed to be successful in their lives outside of the classroom. Now I will be reviewing my research action plan, which highlights the data sources I will be using, the reliability and validity, as well as who will be participating. To begin, I will be using both qualitative and quantitative methods of collecting data. These include tracking student engagement on a variety of lessons and activities. I will be making anecdotal observations and notes in order to track student engagement. In order to see the level of engagement, I will track 3 components: students' willingness to participate in discussions, whether or not they are making connections between lessons, and giving them an exit card 2 to 3 times a week, asking them one thing they learned that lesson. Secondly, peer and self-reflection on thinking and reasoning skills. I will ask students to peer and self-reflect on 5 different thinking and reasoning skills, including comparing and contrasting, argumentation, investigation, problem solving, and decision making. I will use an exit card system or a quick prompt at the end of class that asks guiding reflection questions. If the lesson was collaborative based with a lot of group work, the prompt will be aimed at peer reflection. And if the lesson is focused on more independent work, the prompt will be aimed at self-reflection. Ultimately, these reflections will be collected, compared, and analyzed with my reflections and the observations on their thinking and reasoning skills. This will hopefully give me insight into how they are perceiving their own learning and critical thinking abilities. Next are my quantitative forms of data sources. Critical analysis of literary resources. As a more formal and structured form of assessment and data collection, I will ask students to do 1 critical analysis. The analysis will be 1 literary resource and will be left open and flexible for students to choose what resource is of most interest to them. For context, the resource could be a chapter from a novel, a picture book, or a poem, or alternatively, it could be a series of photographs or a piece of art to critically analyze. I will provide students with the success criteria that highlights the level of thinking I'm looking for and the types of critical thinking components I will be assessing. And although we must be assessing and tracking student learning skills and work habits throughout the year regardless, a lot of these skills directly correlate with the ethical critical thinking skills and can provide insight into student progress. The triangulation of my research stems from the fact that my methods of data collection are not all centralized on one singular system or practice. Students' immediate feedback on critical thinking-based lessons provides perception and perspective on what is being taught to them, while their peer and self-reflections is a direct representation of how they perceive their own learning and the learning of those around them. Those combined with the first-hand approach they take when applying these practice critical thinking skills to a formal circumstance all partake in fostering a system of dimension and variety. Looking at a topic with as much ambiguity and critical thinking, it is important to ensure validity and reliability of research. Consistency and repetitiveness are necessary in ensuring reliability, along with consistent opportunities for class discussions and individual reflection time. In order to keep my overarching question at the forefront of my research, my critical analysis assignment will be stretched out over the span of a couple of weeks, providing enough time to see substantial growth and understanding in students. In addition, validity lies within the fact that critical thinking is all about the students' perception of the world around them, and by providing purposeful opportunities for students to share their own perception of their learning, ultimately makes the data both valid and reliable representations of the critical thinking that will be happening within the classroom. The participants that will be providing data for my research will be the students in my class. Student work, discussions, and reflections will all be gathered within my classroom in the school and will be collected during school hours, specifically class time. When doing research that looks into the learning journey of our students, there are some ethical considerations. So to ensure my research is ethical and safe for everyone involved, I will be dedicating one lesson prior to go into detail with my students what the purpose of the research is, what their roles will be, how it benefits them and myself, and leave room for any questions, concerns, or opinions they may want to share. Now that parents are informed, I will send a consent form home with every student, requesting a signature from parents and/or guardians. Confidentiality will be maintained through students anonymously reflecting, as well as the use of pseudonyms when discussing students' work with colleagues. Lastly, all data collection will happen within the classroom to ensure that students feel comfortable and safe and do not feel that their learning is being disrupted in any capacity. To provide myself with a structured and visual plan of data collection, I have created a timeline chart. Anecdotal observation of lessons will happen twice a week from November to May. Peer and self-reflection will occur once a week, also from November to May. Critical analysis assignment will last for roughly 3 weeks, including brainstorming, work periods, editing, and reflecting, and this will take place from February 1st to February 20th. And lastly, assessing learning skills and work habits will occur throughout the entirety of the school year with a weekly revisit. The analysis of my data collection will be as follows. Tracking student engagement will be analyzed by giving each lesson a grade on a scale of 1 to 10, with the grade being representative of how engaged students were. 1 will be low engagement and 10 will be high engagement. Both the given level and my anecdotal notes will be compiled into a spreadsheet software where descriptive statistics will be used in the form of frequencies and percentages to describe the results. For visual representation, the results will be put into a bar graph format showing where student engagement both peaks and falls short. For peer and self-reflection, I will have a pre-created criteria that assesses students' success skills on a scale of 1 to 10. Based on their reflections, I will assign a level between 1 to 10, and these levels will be compiled into a bar graph. And lastly, the critical analysis of the literary resources. Using a comparative analysis, I will take students' final grades on their critical analysis assignment, as well as the data collected from tracking student engagement and tracking peer and self-reflection, and I will plot all 3 on a line graph. This will communicate whether the engagement levels and the practicing of thinking and reasoning skills helped foster a level of critical thinking required for the critical analysis of a literary source. Conducting this action research study will help me in supporting my teaching practice, as it is an interest that is at the core of my personal teaching pedagogy. Critical thinking is what makes us all individually thinking, processing, learning human beings. It is a crucial component to how our students will explore and inquire their way through our classes, and more importantly, how they will find where their personal passions and areas of interest lay. Through conducting this research, I will gain insight into what is actually engaging my students, which ultimately helps my students and myself. In addition, I gain first-hand accounts and perspectives of how the students are perceiving their own learning. Educators can discuss amongst themselves all day what is best for students, but providing students with opportunities to tell us themselves is not only the best feedback we can receive, but it also provides students with a sense of autonomy over their own learning. Every student has the ability to think critically about the work they are doing in their classroom, and this research will give me the knowledge I need to provide them with the tools and experiences they need to carry that deeper level thinking to their worlds outside of the classroom. Thanks for listening.